Hjalmar Schacht was not a Nazi fanatic. He was a banker, an economist, and one of the most sophisticated financial minds Germany had ever produced. Long before Adolf Hitler came to power, Schacht had already earned a reputation as a man who could save a collapsing economy when everyone else had failed. Germany had seen that firsthand. In 1923, the country was drowning in hyperinflation. The German mark had become practically worthless. Workers were paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before prices doubled again. Savings vanished overnight. Social order itself was at risk. As currency commissioner, Schacht introduced a radical solution. Before we begin, subscribe to The Hidden Bank. Here we uncover the hidden financial systems that shaped history, the money behind wars, empires, and global power. Instead of backing money with gold, which Germany no longer had, he created a new currency backed by land and industrial assets. This new money, the Rentenmark, restored confidence almost immediately. Inflation collapsed. Stability returned. Against all expectations, it worked. By the early 1930s, Hjalmar Schacht was seen as a national hero. International bankers respected him. Foreign governments trusted him. To the outside world, Schacht represented financial discipline and economic credibility. Adolf Hitler noticed. When Hitler became chancellor in 1933, Germany was still officially restrained by the Treaty of Versailles. The country was forbidden from rebuilding its military. It was burdened with debt, isolated from global credit markets, and under constant foreign scrutiny. Yet Hitler had one clear goal. Germany would rearm, no matter the cost. On March 17, 1933, Hitler appointed Schacht as president of the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank. A year later, in August 1934, Schacht also became Minister of Economics. With these two positions combined, Schacht effectively controlled Germany's entire financial system. But the problem was simple and brutal. Germany had no money. The state was broke. Tax revenues were weak. Foreign loans were restricted. Printing money openly would trigger inflation and expose Germany's intentions to Britain and France. Schacht was given an impossible mission. He had to finance massive rearmament. He had to prevent inflation. He had to hide military spending from the world. And he had to do it all without real capital. What Schacht created next was not just an economic workaround. It was one of the most sophisticated financial deceptions in modern history. A system designed to manufacture money without printing it, to fund war without declaring it, and to disguise military expansion as harmless economic recovery. This system would quietly power Hitler's war machine long before the first shot of World War II was fired, and almost no one outside Germany noticed it happening. The illusion of money. Hjalmar Schacht understood one fundamental truth. Wars are not won by ideology alone. They are won by credit. Germany did not need gold to rearm. It needed time, trust, and a way to delay payment. Schacht's solution was brilliant in its simplicity and dangerous in its implications. Instead of paying arms manufacturers with cash, the German government created special promissory notes. These notes were called MIFO bills, named after a fake company, Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, or MIFO. MIFO did not really exist. It had no factories, no workers, and no real business operations. On paper, it appeared to be a private company ordering industrial goods. In reality, it was a financial shell created by the German state. Here is how the system worked. When a weapons manufacturer built tanks, planes, or ammunition, the government did not pay them directly. Instead, they received MIFO bills, essentially IOUs guaranteed by the Reichsbank. These bills could be held for up to 5 years. They earned interest. And most importantly, they could be exchanged for real money at the Reichsbank whenever needed. To the manufacturers, MIFO bills were as good as cash. To the government, they were something else entirely. They were hidden debt. Because MIFO was technically a private company, this debt did not appear on official government balance sheets. Rearmament spending was concealed. Foreign observers saw rising employment and industrial output, not military expansion. On paper, Germany looked like it was recovering peacefully. In reality, it was building an army. Between 1934 and 1938, billions of Reichsmarks were created through MIFO bills. Tanks rolled off assembly lines. Aircraft factories expanded. Military infrastructure spread across the country, all without triggering inflation, all without alarming foreign governments, all without gold. Schacht had effectively reinvented money, but this system had a deadline. MIFO bills were not free money, they were promises, and promises eventually come due. By the late 1930s, the volume of MIFO bills was enormous. If too many holders demanded repayment at once, the Reichsbank would be forced to print money, exposing the entire scheme and collapsing confidence. Schacht knew this. He also knew something else. Germany could not repay these debts peacefully. There were only two possible outcomes. Either Germany would drastically cut military spending, which Hitler would never allow, or Germany would seize resources from abroad. In other words, the financial system Schacht built made war not just possible, it made war necessary. As rearmament accelerated, tensions between Schacht and Hitler began to grow. Schacht wanted limits. Hitler wanted expansion without end. By 1938, Schacht openly warned that Germany was heading toward financial disaster. He opposed further uncontrolled military spending and began resisting Hitler's demands. That resistance made him dangerous. In January 1939, Schacht was removed as Minister of Economics. Later, he would be pushed out of the Reichsbank as well. His system had done its job. Germany was armed. The illusion was complete, and the clock was running. When World War II finally began, it was not financed with gold reserves or balanced budgets. It was financed with deferred promises, hidden liabilities, and a massive gamble that conquest would pay the bill. For a time, it did. Occupied territories were looted. Gold reserves were seized. Central banks were stripped of assets. The war machine fed on the economies of conquered nations. But no financial illusion lasts forever. And when the system finally collapsed, it would take Europe and millions of lives with it. War as a financial solution. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the war was not only military, it was financial. The German state was drowning in obligations. MIFO bills were coming due. Military spending had reached unsustainable levels. The Reich could no longer expand without new sources of real value. War was no longer a choice. It was a balance sheet necessity. From the very beginning, conquest was designed to pay for itself. As German forces entered new territories, one of their first targets was not factories or cities, but central banks. Gold reserves were seized. Foreign currency holdings were confiscated. National treasuries were emptied. This was not chaos. It was policy. Poland's central bank gold was captured and transferred west. The same process followed in Belgium, the Netherlands, and later France. Entire financial systems were dismantled and absorbed into the German war economy. But gold alone was not enough. The Reich needed constant flows of resources, food, fuel, labor, and industrial output, without paying market prices. That is exactly what occupation provided. Occupied countries were forced to accept artificially low exchange rates. Their currencies were deliberately weakened. German marks were imposed at values that made German purchases absurdly cheap. In effect, Germany printed money and spent it abroad. Local economies collapsed under the pressure. Inflation exploded. Shortages spread. Meanwhile, Germany extracted goods at a fraction of their real cost. This was economic warfare in its purest form, and it worked, temporarily. Between 1939 and 1941, Germany funded a massive portion of its war effort through exploitation rather than taxation or borrowing. The illusion of financial stability continued, but there was a deeper problem. The system only functioned as long as Germany kept winning. Every new conquest delayed collapse. Every defeat accelerated it. By 1941, Germany faced a new reality. The invasion of the Soviet Union opened a front that consumed resources at an unprecedented scale. Casualties rose. Equipment losses mounted. Fuel shortages became severe. The war machine began burning value faster than it could steal it. At the same time, international scrutiny increased. Neutral countries, especially financial hubs, became essential. Germany needed places where gold could be exchanged, currencies could be converted, and transactions could occur without direct exposure. This is where neutrality became power, and this is where Switzerland enters the story. Switzerland was officially neutral, but neutrality did not mean isolation. Swiss banks were connected to global markets. They had credibility, they had discretion, and most importantly, they had access. Gold that could not be openly traded elsewhere could move through Swiss institutions. Currency conversions that were impossible in London or New York could still occur quietly in Zurich or Basel. Swiss francs became a gateway, not because Switzerland was evil, but because its system was useful. And in wartime finance, usefulness is everything. The question was no longer whether Germany had stolen gold. The real question was this: who was willing to touch it, and under what conditions? That answer would define one of the most controversial financial chapters of World War II. Switzerland, neutrality, and dirty gold. Switzerland entered World War II as a neutral state, surrounded by conflict but officially untouched by it. No armies marched across its borders, no bombs fell on its cities. Yet Switzerland was never isolated from the war. Its position at the center of Europe made that impossible. More importantly, Switzerland was not just a country, it was a financial system. By the late 1930s, Swiss banks had already earned a reputation for stability, secrecy, and professionalism. They were trusted by governments, corporations, and wealthy individuals across the world. In an era of collapsing currencies and frozen assets, Swiss francs were seen as solid and reliable. That trust was priceless. For Nazi Germany, Switzerland offered something no other country could provide: access to the global financial system without political recognition or moral judgment. Germany could not freely trade gold on international markets. Much of the gold it possessed had been stolen from occupied countries or seized from central banks. Its origin was suspicious and increasingly well known. The Switzerland, Germany could convert gold into Swiss francs. Swiss francs could then be used to purchase critical resources from other neutral countries: tungsten, machinery, food, and industrial materials. In many cases, the sellers knew exactly who they were dealing with, but the money was clean enough. Switzerland's official position was clear and consistent. The government did not deny receiving gold from Germany. Instead, it argued that banks could not realistically verify the original source of every asset during wartime. Transactions, they claimed, were conducted legally under international norms. Neutrality required equal treatment of all clients, regardless of politics. From a legal perspective, the argument was defensible. From a moral perspective, it was deeply uncomfortable. By the later years of the war, Allied intelligence had gathered extensive evidence. They tracked gold shipments, monitored refining activities, and documented financial flows through Swiss institutions. The Allies knew that looted gold was being absorbed into the Swiss system. They also knew something else. Without Switzerland, Germany's access to global trade would have been dramatically weaker. Neutrality had become leverage. Yet Switzerland was not acting as a puppet or an ally. It negotiated aggressively, protected its own interests, and demanded payment for risk. German gold was often accepted at a discount. Fees were charged. Profits were made. War created demand. Switzerland supplied infrastructure. By 1944, as Germany began to lose militarily, financial pressure intensified. The Allies warned Switzerland that post-war consequences were coming. Diplomatic messages became sharper. Moral language entered the conversation. But the system kept running until the very end. When the war finally ended in 1945, the battlefield fell silent. The financial war did not. The post-war reckoning, after the surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945, Europe lay in ruins. Cities were destroyed, economies collapsed, and millions were displaced. Governments turned their attention from war to reconstruction, justice, and accountability. And very quickly, the question of money returned. The Allied powers knew that vast amounts of gold had disappeared during the war. Central bank reserves from Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, and other occupied countries were missing. Intelligence reports pointed to a clear destination: Switzerland. The Allies demanded answers. How much gold had Switzerland received from Nazi Germany? How much of it had been looted? And where was it now? Swiss officials did not deny that gold transactions had taken place. Instead, they framed the issue carefully. They argued that Swiss banks operated under legal obligations. They claimed that verifying the origin of gold during wartime was practically impossible. They insisted that neutrality required treating all trading partners equally. In other words, Switzerland admitted the transactions, but denied responsibility. Negotiations dragged on for years. The Allies pushed for full restitution. Switzerland resisted, arguing that returning all disputed assets would destabilize its financial system and punish institutions that had acted within the law as it existed at the time. Behind closed doors, the real discussion was not about morality, it was about leverage. Switzerland still controlled enormous financial resources. It remained essential to post-war trade, currency exchange, and European recovery. Pushing too hard carried risks. Eventually, a compromise was reached. In 1946, Switzerland agreed to pay 250 million Swiss francs to the Allies as compensation for looted gold. The payment was presented as a settlement, not an admission of guilt. It was intended to close the issue permanently. In reality, it closed very little. Later investigations revealed that the amount returned represented only a fraction of the gold that had passed through Swiss hands during the war. Billions in assets remained within the Swiss financial system, now fully integrated and legally protected. From an economic standpoint, it was one of the most profitable settlements in modern history. Switzerland emerged from the war with intact cities, a strengthened banking sector, and enormous international influence. While other nations struggled to rebuild, Swiss institutions expanded, modernized, and positioned themselves as the custodians of global wealth. History often remembers who fought. It rarely remembers who financed survival. But the story did not end there. For decades, the Swiss gold issue faded from public discussion. Governments moved on. Cold War priorities reshaped global politics. Swiss banks grew into multinational giants, managing assets for corporations, governments, and ultra-wealthy individuals across the world. The secrecy that protected wartime transactions became a selling point. Discretion became a product. Then half a century later, the archives began to open. The scandal returns. For nearly 50 years, the story of Swiss gold remained buried in archives, sealed documents, and quiet agreements. Publicly, Switzerland was seen as a model of stability, neutrality, and financial integrity. Its banks were trusted, its secrecy was respected, its past was rarely questioned. But history has a way of resurfacing. In the early 1990s, political pressure, new transparency laws, and the collapse of Cold War silence forced a reopening of old financial records. Researchers, journalists, and historians gained access to documents that had not been seen since the war. What they found changed everything. The newly released files showed that Swiss banks had not merely accepted Nazi gold unknowingly. Internal memos revealed that bankers were aware that much of the gold originated from occupied countries and confiscated reserves. Some documents even referenced concerns about gold taken from individuals who had disappeared during the war. More disturbing still were the discoveries related to dormant accounts. Thousands of bank accounts belonging to Holocaust victims had been frozen after the war. Families searching for lost assets were met with bureaucracy, denial, and legal barriers. In many cases, banks demanded death certificates that could never be produced. In others, records had been erased or destroyed. To survivors and their families, it felt like the theft had never ended. Public outrage grew rapidly. Jewish organizations, survivor groups, and international media began asking the same question. How could a country that claimed moral neutrality profit from stolen gold and then refuse to return the assets of those who had been murdered? Lawsuits followed. Governments applied pressure. For the first time in decades, Switzerland's image cracked. In 1998, after years of legal battles and international negotiations, two of Switzerland's largest banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, agreed to a historic settlement. They paid $1.25 billion to Holocaust survivors and their families. It was one of the largest financial settlements related to World War II assets in history. The payment was framed as humanitarian, not criminal. The banks did not formally admit wrongdoing, but the message was clear. The system had failed morally, even if it had succeeded financially. Yet even this settlement told only part of the story. Investigators concluded that the amount paid represented a small portion of the total value Switzerland gained during the war. Much of the wealth had already been absorbed into the global financial system, multiplied through decades of investment, and rendered legally untouchable. Money can be returned. Time cannot. Reputation, once damaged, never fully recovers. And still, the deeper question remained unanswered. Was Switzerland a villain? Or was it simply a nation that understood something uncomfortable about the world? That survival often belongs not to the righteous, but to the strategic? The system that survived the war. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the financial systems that powered it. While armies disbanded and borders were redrawn, the mechanisms that had moved gold, currency, and capital during the war quietly adapted to a new world. The tools developed to launder stolen assets did not disappear. They evolved. Secrecy became a feature, not a flaw. Anonymous ownership became a service. Cross-border capital movement became an industry. What had once been an emergency wartime solution slowly transformed into the foundation of modern international banking. Switzerland stood at the center of this transformation. During the war, Swiss banks perfected the art of discretion. They learned how to accept assets without asking questions, how to move money across borders without attracting attention, and how to shield clients behind layers of legal protection. After the war, these same techniques were repackaged, not for Nazi Germany, but for corporations, governments, and ultra-wealthy individuals across the world. The logic was simple. If secrecy protected wartime gold, it could protect private fortunes. If neutrality shielded controversial transactions, it could shield tax optimization. If discretion allowed survival during war, it could allow prosperity during peace. By the 1950s and 1960s, Switzerland had become a magnet for global capital. Political leaders, multinational corporations, industrial families, and foreign governments all placed their assets in Swiss vaults. They trusted the same principles that had protected gold during the 1940s: confidentiality, legal insulation, and political neutrality. The wartime past was rarely mentioned, but its influence was everywhere. Offshore banking structures expanded rapidly. Shell companies appeared across Europe, the Caribbean, and later Asia. Assets were no longer held directly, but through layers of intermediaries designed to obscure ownership and reduce accountability. Currency conversion became a strategic tool. Capital could move faster than laws, and regulation always lagged behind innovation. Switzerland did not invent global finance, but it refined it. The country became a template. Other financial centers followed the model. What had once been a hidden wartime economy became the backbone of globalization. In this sense, the Swiss gold scandal was not just a historical episode, it was a turning point. It demonstrated that money could survive moral collapse. It showed that wealth could be preserved even when nations burned. And it proved that in the modern world, power does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a suit. Before we go further, if you are watching this on the Hidden Bank, this is exactly what this channel exists to uncover. Not myths, not simplified stories, but the real financial systems that shape wars, empires, and global power. If you want to understand how money truly moves in moments of crisis, make sure you are subscribed, because what comes next goes even deeper. The moral calculation. Every financial system eventually faces the same question, not whether it is legal, not whether it is profitable, but whether it is defensible. For Switzerland, that question arrived long after the war ended. During World War II, Swiss leaders justified their actions through necessity. They argued that a small country surrounded by powerful enemies had limited options. Trade, they said, was survival. Banking, they claimed, was neutrality. Refusing transactions would have endangered the nation itself. From this perspective, Switzerland was not a villain. It was a realist. But history rarely accepts a single explanation. To the Allied nations, Switzerland looked less like a survivor and more like a beneficiary. While cities across Europe were reduced to ruins, Swiss infrastructure remained untouched. While currencies collapsed, Swiss banks grew stronger. While millions lost everything, Swiss vaults filled with gold. This contrast was impossible to ignore. Historians later described Switzerland's wartime role as a form of economic arbitrage. The country converted chaos into stability and stability into profit. It did not fire weapons. It did not occupy land. But it enabled a system that transformed stolen wealth into economic power. The legacy of the hidden bank. The most dangerous systems are not the ones that collapse. They are the ones that survive. When World War II ended, Switzerland emerged physically untouched and financially strengthened. Its cities stood intact. Its industries were modernized. Its banks were liquid, respected, and globally connected. While much of Europe was focused on rebuilding from ruins, Switzerland was already positioned for the next phase of global power. Finance. The gold that passed through Swiss vaults during the war did not disappear. It did not evaporate with peace treaties or apologies. It became capital. It became leverage. It became the foundation for Switzerland's rise as the world's most trusted financial hub. In the decades that followed, Swiss banking secrecy evolved from a wartime tool into a global standard. Confidentiality, discretion, and legal insulation were no longer associated with war economies. They were rebranded as financial stability. Wealthy individuals, multinational corporations, and even governments began moving their assets into Swiss institutions, trusting the same protections that had once shielded looted gold. This was not coincidence, it was continuity. The techniques developed during the war, anonymous accounts, layered transactions, jurisdictional insulation, currency conversion mechanisms, became pillars of modern international finance. Offshore banking, shell companies, and capital flight did not begin in the post-war era. They were refined during it, using lessons learned under extreme pressure. Switzerland did not hide from this legacy. It institutionalized it. By the 1970s and 1980s, Swiss banks controlled trillions of dollars in foreign assets. Political elites from unstable regions parked their wealth behind Swiss laws. Corporations optimized taxes through Swiss structures. Families protected fortunes across generations. The country transformed neutrality into a brand and secrecy into a service. But with success came silence. For decades, uncomfortable questions were avoided. Wartime records remained sealed. Victims' accounts remained unresolved. The narrative focused on stability, prosperity, and neutrality, not on origin stories. That silence ended in the 1990s. When archival documents were finally released, the past resurfaced. Evidence showed that Swiss banks had knowingly handled looted gold, that accounts belonging to Holocaust victims were frozen, lost, or quietly absorbed, that internal decisions prioritized institutional protection over restitution. The global reaction was swift and severe. Lawsuits were filed. Governments demanded explanations. Survivor groups organized protests. Media investigations exposed details long denied. Switzerland's carefully maintained image cracked under scrutiny. In 1998, two of the country's largest banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, agreed to a $1.25 billion settlement with Holocaust survivors and their families. It was one of the largest financial settlements related to World War II assets. Yet even this historic agreement addressed only a fraction of the wealth accumulated during the war. Money can be counted, moral debt cannot. The settlement closed legal cases, but it did not erase history. It did not undo the economic advantage gained, and it did not dismantle the system that made such accumulation possible. That system still exists. Today, global finance operates on the same principles refined during wartime Switzerland: opacity, jurisdictional complexity, legal insulation, and strategic neutrality. Capital moves faster than accountability. Wealth travels where questions are fewest. And crises, once again, create opportunity for those positioned to manage risk rather than confront it. This is why the story of Swiss gold matters today. Not because it belongs to the past, but because it explains the present. Wars no longer require gold bars crossing borders. They require algorithms, contracts, sanctions, and financial leverage. But the logic is unchanged. Those who control money control outcomes. And those who master neutrality often shape history without ever appearing on the battlefield. If you want to understand how power really works, not through speeches or flags, but through balance sheets and institutions, subscribe to the Hidden Bank. Because the wars we remember are fought with weapons, but the wars that decide the future are fought with money. The war behind the war. History teaches us to look at wars through battles, generals, and dates. We remember invasions, explosions, and surrender documents. But history rarely teaches us to look at balance sheets. World War II is remembered as a clash of ideologies and armies. Yet beneath the tanks, planes, and uniforms existed another war. Silent, legal, and immensely profitable. A war fought in offices instead of trenches. A war fought with contracts instead of bullets. A war where victory was measured not in territory, but in liquidity. Switzerland did not invade nations. It did not drop bombs. It did not occupy cities. But it made choices. It chose to accept gold when others refused it. It chose to convert stolen wealth when others questioned its origin. It chose profit over disruption, stability over morality, survival over confrontation. These decisions did not happen in chaos. They happened calmly, systematically, and under the protection of law. And they worked. While Europe burned, Switzerland accumulated. While nations collapsed under debt, Switzerland expanded its reserves. While others rebuilt from ruins, Switzerland entered the post-war world already ahead. This does not make Switzerland uniquely evil. It makes it uniquely honest about how power operates. Nations rise not only by fighting wars, but by positioning themselves around them. Empires fall not only because of defeat, but because of financial exhaustion. And neutrality, when combined with discipline and strategy, can become a weapon more powerful than armies. The uncomfortable truth is this: the war economy did not end in 1945. It evolved. The systems built to launder gold became the foundation of modern global finance. The mechanisms designed to hide origin became tools to protect wealth. The logic that justified wartime secrecy became peacetime banking policy. Today, money still moves faster than morality. Crises still create opportunity, and neutrality still protects those who know how to use it. The Swiss gold heist was not an isolated crime. It was a prototype, a blueprint for how wealth is preserved, multiplied, and insulated during catastrophe. This is why these stories matter, because the next global crisis will not be decided only by weapons or politics. It will be decided by financial architecture, by who controls liquidity, by who can move capital when borders close. And those battles are already happening. If you want to understand the real mechanics of power, the systems that operate behind headlines, beyond ideology, and outside public debate, subscribe to The Hidden Bank. Because history is not only written by the victors, it is financed by the survivors. And the most important wars are the ones you never see.